Her voice shook when she ordered her coffee. So I wrote, "Don't worry, I've got you." I didn't know that one note would change both our mornings forever. It was one of those gray mornings when the city feels half asleep. Rain streaking the windows, the hum of espresso machines filling the silence. I'd been behind the counter since dawn, half lost in routine, when the door opened and she stepped in. She wasn't like the usual morning crowd. No phone in hand, no earbuds, no rush. Just a woman standing still, as if the world had slowed around her. Her coat was damp from the rain, strands of hair sticking to her cheek. When our eyes met, she offered a small, uncertain smile, polite, but trembling at the edges. I asked what she'd like. That's when her voice caught. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed to falter halfway. Si cappuccino, please," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just nervousness, it was something heavier, like she'd been carrying too much for too long. Her hand shook slightly as she reached into her purse for change. I smiled softly, trying not to make her feel noticed. "It's okay, take your time." Her eyes darted away, and I could see the embarrassment rise in her posture. Shoulders tightening, breath uneven. I turned away before it could settle too deep. Sometimes kindness works best when it's quiet. When her drink was ready, I wrote something on a napkin before sliding the cup across the counter. "Don't worry, I've got you." She blinked at it. Once, twice. Then looked up at me, eyes wide with surprise. For a second, I thought maybe I'd crossed a line. But then, her lips curved, just barely, into a small smile. The kind of smile that fights its way through a crack in the dark. She took the cup carefully, her fingers brushing mine. Brief, accidental, but warm. "Thank you," she said. Her voice still shook, but there was gratitude in it now. I nodded. "Anytime." She turned to leave, her steps light but hesitant. As the door closed behind her, I realized the air in the cafe felt different. Quieter, but in a softer way. The napkin she held in her hand was gone, tucked into her pocket like something she needed to remember. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. I watched her cross the street through the fogged glass, one hand holding her cup close to her chest like it meant more than coffee should. Maybe it did, because for the rest of that morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the way her voice trembled, and how one small sentence written in ink had steadied it, even for a moment. I didn't know her name yet, but I knew the sound of her silence, and somehow that felt like enough to start something real. The next morning, she came back. Same hour, same rain. Like the city hadn't moved since yesterday. I didn't expect her to, but when the bell above the door rang and I saw her standing there again, something quiet inside me eased. She looked a little different this time, not in appearance but in energy. Her posture wasn't as tense. Her eyes didn't dart around like they did before. Still cautious, still reserved, but softer at the edges. She waited patiently as I finished with another customer, hands folded around the strap of her bag. Before she could speak, I said, "Cappuccino, right?" Her head lifted in surprise, and for the first time her eyes actually met mine. "You remembered," she said, voice steadier now. "I try not to forget important things," I replied. A faint smile ghosted across her lips, the kind that disappears almost before it arrives. But this time she didn't hide it fast enough. While the coffee brewed, I wrote something small on a napkin again. Not a big gesture, just enough to make her morning lighter. When I placed the cup in front of her, the note peeked from under it. "Rough mornings pass faster with good coffee." She read it, then looked up at me, her smile lingering longer than yesterday. "You really do write a lot for someone who makes coffee," she teased softly, her tone light but careful, like she was still learning how to speak comfortably again. "Maybe it's cheaper than therapy," I said, grinning. That earned me the quietest laugh. A sound that felt new, like hearing sunlight for the first time after weeks of rain. For a while, she sat at her usual spot by the window, sipping slowly, eyes wandering through the glass. I caught glimpses of her reflection in the chrome machines, serene, thoughtful, with that small crease on her forehead that made her seem both strong and fragile. I didn't ask her name, didn't ask what she did for a living. felt wrong to rush it. Some connections are meant to breathe. When she finished her cup, she hesitated before leaving, just long enough to meet my eyes again. "Thank you," she said, voice calm this time. "Anytime," I answered just like before. She smiled again, a little wider this time, then left, holding the cup in both hands as if it still had warmth left to give. After she was gone, I noticed the napkin she'd left behind. Not the one with my note, but another, folded once and pressed beneath the saucer. When I opened it, all it said was, "You make good coffee." Simple, ordinary, but for some reason, it felt like the most honest thing I'd read all week. And that's when I knew she wasn't just another customer anymore. She was the quietest part of my morning that somehow made everything louder. By the third week, her visits had become part of the rhythm of the cafe. Every morning at 8:12, not earlier, not later, the bell above the door would chime, and she'd step in with that same calm presence, as if the world outside existed in a slower time zone than ours. She'd always sit at table 7, near the window, far enough from the counter to keep her thoughts private, but close enough for me to notice when her eyes lifted to watch the rain. She never talked much, but her silence had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was thoughtful, maybe even peaceful. That morning, she arrived before I opened. Through the half-pulled blinds, I saw her waiting, hands tucked in her coat pockets, face tilted toward the gray sky. I hurried through the last of the setup, unlocked the door, and gestured her in with a smile. She smiled back, shyly, and the warmth that flickered through me was ridiculous for a man who'd barely exchanged 30 words with her in total. When I finally got to table 7 after the morning rush, her chair was empty, but her cup was half finished. And beside it, a folded napkin. I didn't open it right away. There's a strange reverence to something left behind deliberately. When I did, her handwriting greeted me, neat but faint, as if written with a shaking hand. "Thank you. Some days, that cup is the only thing that keeps me steady." For a moment, I couldn't move. It wasn't about the coffee. I knew that. It was about being seen, even in the smallest way. I tucked the napkin into my apron pocket, smoothing the fold like it was something fragile. The words stayed with me all day, replaying every time the bell above the door rang. That evening, when she returned, I tried to act like I hadn't seen the note, but she knew I had. Her eyes searched my face briefly, waiting to see how I'd respond. So I said simply, "Your table missed you." She laughed softly, caught off guard. "You make it sound like it has feelings." "Maybe it does," I replied. "It gets good company every morning." Her cheeks colored slightly as she took her seat. That small, human reaction, the blush she probably thought no one noticed, felt like a sunrise after weeks of rain. As she sipped her cappuccino, I wiped the counter, pretending to be busy. But inside, something subtle had shifted. The space between us no longer felt like a customer and a barista. It felt like two people quietly learning each other's language through routine and care. I didn't write a note that day. Some moments don't need words. Sometimes it's enough just to know someone will be there again tomorrow. Same time, same place, same quiet promise. Started as any other morning. Rain on the glass, the faint hiss of milk steaming, the scent of roasted beans curling through the air like comfort. I wiped down the counter, glanced at the clock, 8:09, 3 minutes before she usually walked in. By 8:15, the bell hadn't rung. By 8:30, her chair sat untouched, the surface of table 7 clean and waiting. It's strange how silence can grow louder when you're expecting someone. The cafe was busy that day, people coming and going, laughter spilling from corners. Yet all I could hear was the absence of her voice, the quiet rustle of her coat that usually brushed the doorframe. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she'd slept in. Maybe she was sick. Maybe life had simply called her elsewhere for a day. Still, every time the bell jingled, I looked up too fast, each false alarm tightening something in my chest. The following morning, her seat was still empty. The napkin dispenser stood untouched. No soft knock on the counter. No careful smile. Just me pretending I wasn't waiting. It's embarrassing, the way hope can make you restless. By the second afternoon, I caught myself wiping the same spot on the counter over and over, just to have something to do. I didn't realize how much her presence filled the room until it wasn't there. Then, on the third day, just as I was about to close, the door opened. She stepped in, slower this time, smaller somehow. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair tied back carelessly. She looked tired, like the world had been heavier than usual. For a moment, she hesitated near the doorway, as if unsure she was welcome. I didn't say a word, just turned to the machine and started her order. When I slid the cup across the counter, she stared at it for a long time before whispering, "You remembered." "I always do," I said. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the cup, fingers brushing mine again. But this time, the touch lingered a little longer, deliberate, grateful. She didn't stay to drink it, just smiled weakly, nodded once, and left. After she was gone, I found myself looking at the reflection on the window. My own face, her fading outline behind it, and the rain blurring everything in between. That night, I pulled her napkin from my apron, the one she'd left before, and read it again. Some days, that cup is the only thing that keeps me steady. Now, those words felt heavier. Whatever had shaken her voice the first day, it hadn't gone away. It had just been quiet for a while. And somehow I knew tomorrow I'd be waiting again. Same time, same table, same hope. Because sometimes, showing up is the only thing you can do for someone who's still learning how to stay. She came in late that evening, long after the morning rush. The cafe was nearly empty. Just a few students huddled in the back, the soft hum of a closing playlist filling the space. I was cleaning up, half expecting her not to come at all. But then the door opened, and there she was, wrapped in her gray coat, raindrops still clinging to the ends of her hair. "Didn't think you'd make it today?" I said, wiping my hands on a towel. Her smile was tired, but gentle. "Didn't think I would either." She sat at her usual table, but instead of facing the window, she turned toward me. There was something different in her eyes, not just sadness but a decision. The kind people make when they're about to share something heavy. I brought her the usual cappuccino, set it down, and leaned against the counter, trying not to stare too openly. She wrapped her hands around the cup but didn't drink. The steam rose between us like a barrier made of warmth and hesitation. After a long silence, she said softly, "You ever have days when speaking feels impossible?" I nodded. "More than I admit." Her gaze lifted. "You don't seem like the type who struggles with words." "I just hide it better than most." That made her smile. Barely, but real. For a few seconds, it felt like we were standing on the edge of something honest. I wanted to ask what had happened to her voice that first morning. What kind of pain made someone shake while ordering coffee? But the look in her eyes stopped me. There was fragility there and trust. The kind of trust that shatters if you push too soon. So instead I said, "You don't have to explain. But if you ever want to talk, I'm here." She looked down at her cup, tracing the rim with her finger. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to say something, then closed again. Whatever words she had, they got lost somewhere between her heart and her throat. She finally whispered, "You're kind." "I'm not used to that." I swallowed the ache in my chest and smiled. "Maybe it's time you start getting used to it." That earned me another small laugh, soft and short-lived, but it filled the room more than any song could. When she stood to leave, I noticed something. The ring she always wore on her left hand was gone. The skin beneath it was pale, newly bare. She caught me noticing, and for a moment, her expression faltered, caught between shame and relief. Then, without another word, she said goodnight and left. I stood there long after the door closed, the echo of her footsteps fading into the rain. The conversation never fully happened, but somehow, everything that needed to be said already had. The storm that night was relentless, the kind that makes the whole city sound like it's sighing. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the buildings, and the wind pushed the rain sideways, painting streaks across the cafe's glass front. We'd stayed open later than usual. I told myself it was for business, but really, I think I was waiting for her. She came in soaked. No umbrella, hair clinging to her face, her coat darkened with rain. Still, she smiled when she saw me. "Guess I picked the worst day for coffee," she said, her voice steadier now, though her hands were trembling from the cold. "Actually," I said, sliding her usual cup across, "best day. Coffee tastes better when it's storming outside." She laughed softly and sat at her usual spot. The cafe was empty except for us. The rain pressed against the windows, muting the world outside. Every sound felt close. The clink of her spoon, the hum of the espresso machine, the quiet rhythm of our breathing. When she finished, she stood by the door and stared out into the downpour. "It's worse than I thought," she murmured. "I'll walk you," I said. She hesitated, but then nodded. A small, grateful nod that said more than words could. Outside, the rain hit us like pins, cold and sharp. I held my jacket over both of us as we walked side by side down the narrow street. The puddles reflected the amber glow of the streetlights, each step splashing softly. We didn't talk much, just the sound of the storm, and sometimes, her quiet laughter when I tried to dodge the deeper puddles. At one point, she stumbled slightly, her heel catching on uneven pavement. I caught her instinctively, one hand on her shoulder, the other steadying her arm. She froze for a second, looking up at me, eyes wide, breath caught between us. "Got you," I said quietly, echoing the words I'd written that first day. Her lips parted, like she wanted to reply, but all she did was nod. Slowly, she slipped her hand into mine. Her fingers were cold, fragile almost, but the way she held on made my chest ache. There was no rush, no hesitation. Just that quiet kind of closeness that feels like safety. When we reached her building, she turned to me, rain dripping from her lashes. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know." She looked at me for a long moment, then whispered, "But I'm glad you did." And before stepping inside, she reached out, brushed her thumb lightly against my wrist. A fleeting touch, soft but deliberate. It lingered longer in memory than it did in time. I stood there even after she disappeared through the door, rain still pouring down. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't mind the storm. Because somehow it felt like we'd both just found a little warmth in it. The next morning, the city felt new. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind streets that gleamed like mirrors. The air carried that after-storm freshness. Quiet, clean. The kind that makes everything feel like it's starting over. I arrived early, out of habit more than necessity. The cafe was still half in shadow, the espresso machine warming up, the smell of beans slowly filling the space. I moved through the motions, grinding, pouring, setting out chairs, but something in me felt light, almost expectant. At 7:45, the door opened. She stood there in soft morning light, hair dry, coat open, a small paper bag in one hand. For the first time since I'd met her, she wasn't hiding behind silence or rain. There was something settled in her posture, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. "You're early," I said, smiling. "So are you," she replied, her voice smooth and steady. "Guess we both couldn't wait for coffee today." She walked up to the counter and set the paper bag down. "Don't make mine today," she said. "This time, I've got you." I blinked, half laughing. "You've got me?" She nodded and pulled out a thermos and 2 small cups. The smell of coffee, rich, nutty, slightly sweet, filled the air. "I practiced," she said almost shyly. "Thought I'd return the favor." She poured us both a cup. Her hands didn't shake. I took a sip. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. "It's good," I said, smiling. "Better than mine, actually." She rolled her eyes, laughing softly. "Don't lie. I'm not." There was a pause, not awkward, just peaceful. The kind that comes when words finally don't have to do the heavy lifting anymore. She looked around the cafe, then back at me. "You know," she said, voice warm, "that first day, I almost left. I was so sure I'd embarrass myself again. But then you wrote that note, and somehow, I didn't feel small anymore." Her words landed like something fragile and real. I didn't interrupt, just listened. I don't know what made you write it, she continued, but it changed the way my mornings felt. It reminded me that kindness still exists. I smiled, trying to steady my voice. You reminded me of that too. We stood there for a moment. Just the sound of cups touching the counter, the hum of the city waking outside. Then she reached across the counter, her hand resting over mine, warm, certain. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me before I could see myself. Outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering across the cafe floor. The same window where rain once blurred her reflection now held her clearly. Steady, radiant, free. 2 cups sat side by side on the counter, steam rising in perfect rhythm. The napkin holder beside them was empty, no more words needed. Because that morning, her voice finally said everything I'd been waiting to hear.